Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Karibuni sana. I want to teach you chapter 4 of our theory lesson. And in this particular chapter, really, we're going to be looking at PHP functions and PHP arrays. In our practical so far, we haven't used a function, but in our next class, I'm going to show you how, in our next practical class, I'm going to show you how to use that. But we've used arrays. We used arrays when we were retrieving data from the database, if you can remember. And therefore, in this lesson, we just want to understand more about arrays. So let's begin. So just like in other programming languages, functions in PHP is simply a block of code that can be used repeatedly, and it performs a specific task. Now, functions in PHP are not executed when the page is loaded, because just like in other programming languages, you have to call the function for it to be executed. Now, even though we've not written any PHP function, we've so far used, I think we've used several built-in functions. Like the one that we used to encrypt or to hash the password. Was it called the crypt function? We've also used a function to sanitize the data. Was it HTML something char? I can't remember it very well. So those functions that we just call and they're executed without having to write them, they're called built-in functions. Okay, so let's move on. Now, this is the syntax for writing a function. It begins with the keyword function. Then after that, you give a name to your function. The name should follow the naming convention for identifiers, and no spaces. I can only start with I can't remember very well. So those naming conventions, please refresh yourself with that. Then we have this, the opening bracket here and the closing bracket. These ones, they're called the parameter list. We're going to see how to use them. Then this opening curly bracket and the closing curly bracket here depicts the beginning and the end of the function. So within this, then we have either one statement or multiple statements that we want to be executed, and this function is going to be called to perform that particular function. Here we have a good example of a function. So again, you begin with a keyword, then you give it a name. Remember, no spaces. So this particular function is called write message. This particular naming method is called the camel case, where every new word begins with an uppercase. It's called camel case. Then we have an empty parameter list, then the beginning of the function, the end of the function, and this function has one statement. The statement is echo hello world. Now, that is what we call the function definition. Is it called the function definition? Yes, the function definition. And then what we need to do in order to execute this particular function is to call it. So a function is not executed until you call it, a user-defined function. So we call the function by writing its name and passing it the parameters that it requires. This one is not taking in any parameter, so we have an empty parameter list inside there. So when we execute this particular code, we're going to get the output hello world in our browser. Okay, so I just mentioned the function definition. I'm trying to remember. We have function definition, we have function body. There's something else I'm trying to remember and I'm forgetting. I am forgetting. I am forgetting that. Anyway, sometimes you can just define a function by mentioning this function write message, then you put here the semicolon like that. Then you end up down there implementing the function. So when you're implementing the function, it means you do the function definition, which is what I've underlined, together with the function body. So this is the function body. And the lines of code that are going to be executed when the function is called. But there's still something that I'm missing. I can't figure it out right now. Okay. Oh, did I go back instead of forward? Okay. Good. So the next important concept is the concept of arguments. So information can be passed to functions through arguments. So we pass some information, info. We pass some info to a function. So normally an argument is just a variable. We just declare a variable in the parameter list. So they're normally specified inside the parentheses. So that's why we are saying the parameter list. The parentheses, that is the one that is just after the function name. After the function name. So that one. You can add as many arguments as you want, but you must separate them with a comma. Like that. So let's have a look at an example of a function that receives one argument. So here we are defining the function by the keyword function. Then the name of this function is family name. Then we create a variable fname. Then in the body of the function we have an echo statement. We want to say fname. Then we also print this string and we print a break. So below here we are doing several function calls. So we do family name, we pass it that name. We call it again, we pass it that name. We call the function again, we pass it that name. So as you can see, as we continue to do that, the output of this particular program is going to be this. So it's like the first name is what we are passing it. It's just going to print echo here, echo the name that we pass it and this string here. And of course the break. So that is why when we were defining the function, we said it's a block of code that can be executed many times. So you see here we are calling the function 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times and passing it different parameters. So this is an example of a function with one argument. In this second example, we have a function that receives two arguments. Fname, remember, you have to separate them with a comma. And this is just a variable. You see $, then fname. $, then year. So we have the two. We have the two parameters. And how are we using them? You can see here we have fname and year, born in. So when we do that, we have to pass this particular function two values. So family name is the name of the function. We call it, we pass it. So this one is going to be taken there, and this one is going to be stored there. And therefore, when we print, when we call this function the first time, it's going to print out this. Similarly, here we call it, that one is going to go there, that one is going to go there. And therefore, the output of that function is going to be this. Finally, this one here, Jim will be stored there. This one will be stored here, and the output is gonna be this. So I hope that is clear. Okay. Now let's look at another important concept in PHP. In programming, we have programs that are termed strongly typed programming languages. Programming languages such as C, C++ are strongly typed programming languages. Reason why we call them strongly typed is because really you have to specify the data type of a variable when you're declaring it. On the other hand, we've seen many times that when we want to declare a variable in PHP, we just go ahead and do, for example, fname, and maybe assign it some name, like that. Now, for such languages, they are termed loosely typed. In that, you don't have to specify the data type. When you're declaring this particular variable. In C, we could have done something like string fname. Then we assign it some string like that. So C, we term it strongly typed because you have to specify the data type. Otherwise, PHP will automatically associate the variable to the data type depending on the data that is assigned to that particular variable. However, an update was made in PHP version 7, which is what we are using. In PHP version 7, you can be able to specify the data type. You can be able to specify the data type that is expected when you're declaring either a function or even a variable. So let's have an example of that in PHP 7. So here, look, in the following example, we try to add a number and a string without the strict requirement. So have a look. So here, look here, we have this function. We have this function add numbers. Then we've declared two parameters in it, and we are declaring them with int a and int b, like that. Then we want this function to return a plus b. So when we call this function, we are saying echo, then we are calling add numbers, then we pass it a 5, which is going to be stored here. Then we are passing it a string. You see, this is the string because it's inside double quote. It's a string, so we are passing it 5 days. So since strict is not enabled, 5 days is gonna be converted to just 5 into int 5, and therefore the output of this particular program is gonna be 10 because we have not declared strict type conversion. Okay. This is gone too high. Maybe I can just type it. Okay. So here we have this statement which I'm just retyping. Declare strict underscore types is equals to 1. That semicolon. So the purpose of this statement is to specify that you have to specify the type of data it's like we are changing now PHP here from loosely typed to strongly typed. Now, a few things you need to understand about this function, the declare strict underscore types is equals to 1. This function is that, number one, you have to put it as the first line. You have to put it at the very first line of your PHP file. So that's important to understand. Now, the other thing you need to understand is that when you do that, and we repeat the same code, we pass 5 to this integer a, and we pass a string to this integer b, it's going to result to a fatal error. So uncaught type error, you can see it's a type error. Argument number 2, so this is argument number 1, then this is argument number 2. Argument 2 passed to this function add numbers must be of the type integer, but we've given string, so that's the error. That's the error message. So when you do that, then really you're able to do that. So I think this particular change was introduced in PHP 7 because many developers were finding PHP to be quite ambiguous, in that sometimes when you don't have to specify the data type, you can easily make mistakes with data, and therefore this was introduced in PHP 7. Okay, so that is it about loosely typed and the update in PHP 7. Now here we want to look at what we call the default argument value. Now sometimes you can declare an argument like we have in this example. You declare an argument mean height and you give it some value. So this is the assignment operator, you give it the value 50. Now, when you do this in a function, you see here we want to print the height is, then that variable mean height. Now look what happens when we call the function the first time, set height, and we pass it a value, then this value 350 is going to be printed. The height is 350. But when we call the function and we don't pass it a value, then the default value is going to be used, and therefore it's going to print the height is 50 on this particular call, because we have not passed it. Otherwise on this one we've passed 135, therefore it's going to print the height is 135. Here it's going to print the height is 80. So this here is what we call the default. This is how you specify a default argument value. A default argument value. So that if the function is called and no value is passed, then that value is used. Okay. Okay, we've already met the return statement, and in this particular slide we want to learn about returning values. Now a function, when you call a function, it can either perform whatever operations it's supposed to perform and end it at that. For example, this particular function here, the set height, the purpose of this function is to simply receive some height and print on the screen that particular height. So this function does not return a value, and it does not need to return a value. However, in this particular example, we have a function called sum. This particular function sum is receiving two integer arguments, x and y. After that, it has a variable z, and it sums up the value that has been passed to it, x and y, and returns that particular value. Now, look what we're doing here. In this statement, we want to print out this string. This is just a string. 5 plus 10 is equals to. So we want to print that out. Then we are concatenating it with. So we are concatenating using the dot operator. We are concatenating that with the function called sum. So we are calling sum. We are passing it the value 5 and 10. And therefore, when we do that, it's gonna return the value 15. This call is gonna return the value 15, because this function is going to add 5 plus 10 and return it. So that is the purpose of the return statement. Normally the return statement is done at the very last line of that particular function, just before the closing curly brackets. So I know that is quite a lot. So I can give you a minute to comprehend what I've just said, that a function can return a value or not. In this particular example, the function is returning the sum of the two numbers that you pass it. Okay, so similarly in this statement, this is gonna print out this, and in this statement, I'm gonna print out this. So can you make sense out of that? Okay, so let's move on. The return type in PHP 7 can also what's the word I'm trying to say? You can specify the data type of the return type in PHP 7. To do that, you need to add a colon. And the data type right before the opening curly brackets. So let's look at an example to understand what we're saying. So we have this. We have return, then some value here. So we can specify how we want this value to be returned. So to specify that, you do this. So here we have the function add numbers. We are passing it two float arguments. So we want to specify the data type of the returned value. So to do that, we use a full colon just after the argument list and the keyword for the data type that you want to specify. For example, float, which is for decimal numbers. And therefore, when we echo, we call that function, we pass it 1.2 and 5. It's gonna print out 6.4. So that is how you specify the data type of the returned value. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of functions, PHP functions. Anyone with a question before we move on to arrays? Kuna mtu ana swali? So in our practicals, we are going now to be using functions going forward to do a number of things. and to avoid repetition of code. So one way to do that, for example, is to you remember we were sanitizing data using the HTML char function and the MySQL sanitize function. So instead of retyping that all the time, we can put those functions for sanitizing in one function, and so that we just call the function, it sanitizes the data, and we get the data back to that particular variable. So you're going to see that during the practical. Okay. So let's move on quickly to PHP arrays. An array is a variable. The only difference between an array and other variables is that the variables we've looked at so far stores a single value, while an array stores multiple values. So it's a special type of a variable. How is it able to store multiple values? It actually stores them in a list. It stores them in a list, and every position is defined by a number. Every position in the list is defined by a number. So almost something like this. For example, let me draw something here. Okay, so so maybe here we have let me just try and type whatever we have there. Volvo. Then maybe here we have BMW. And then maybe here we have Toyota. Something like that. So this is how it actually does it. This is how it does it. Then maybe here we have Range Rover, like that. So that's how it does it. Stores values in a list like that. Normally, each value is stored in a particular position. The very first position here is what we call position 0. So that is not an O, that is 0. Then this one here, as you might have already guessed it, is position 1. Oh, sorry. This is position 1. And therefore this one here is going to be position 2. And this one here is going to be position 3. So the most important thing to remember really is the fact that the very first position is position 0 and not 1. Okay, so let's have an example. Okay, so here they're just explaining why is an array important. You see, if we have 3 cars, we have to create 3 different variables for the cars. Cars 1, cars 2, cars 3. So what happens if you have 300 cars? The solution for such is to create an array. So an array can hold many values under a single name. So in PHP, an array is created using the array function. So it's an inbuilt function. We have three types of arrays: indexed arrays. So the example I was showing you, 0, 1, 2, it's called indexed array. That is, every position of the array is defined by a numeric index or value. Then you have an associative array. An associative array is also referred to as a named array. So the keys, that is 0, 1, 2, 3, they actually have a name instead of being represented by a number. And we've actually used an associative array in our practical. You remember when we were retrieving data from the database and we used the printr function to print that particular array? That is an associative array because it has the name of the column and the value that it has stored. You remember it was something like, let me see. It was something like first name. Then we have something like that. So that was an associative array. And lastly, the last type is what we call the multi-dimensional array. So with multi-dimensional array, unlike one-dimensional array, which is like this, it has one column. So multi-dimensional can have two columns. Something like that. So here, this position here is 0, then this one 1. Here, this position is 0, 0, 0, 1. 1, 0, 1, 1. 2, 1. 2, 0, 2, 2. Like that. 2, 1. So that is what we call a multi-dimensional array. So let's have a look at indexed arrays. So there are two ways to create indexed arrays. The first way is by creating a variable, then you use the array function like that. The other way is that instead of creating this variable like this, you now add the square brackets after the name of the variable or array. Then you specify the position or the index. So position 0, you want to store this value. Position 1, you want to store this value. Position 2, you want to store this value. Like that. So how do you access values of an array? This is an example. We've just we've just created an array called cars using the array function. First value, second value, third value. So if we want to print these values, we can use an echo. This is just a string I like. Then we specify the positions. Position 0, position 1, and position 2. And therefore that will print out I like Volvo, BMW, and Toyota. Okay, so we can play with arrays in a number of ways in order to achieve whatever we want. But some of the important things that you can do to an array in order to achieve a number of stuff is, for example, find out the length of the array. By length, we mean the size or the number of items that are in the array. So for that, we use an inbuilt PHP function called count. So it's used to return the number of elements in an array. So here we've declared an array called cars. We've assigned it some 3 values. And therefore, if we echo count cars, it's gonna output the value 3 because this array has 3 values. So that's important. And you're gonna see why in our practical. Okay. Normally, we loop through an indexed array in order to print out all the values of the array. So look at this example. We have cars array. We've assigned it these 3 values. Here we are getting the length of the array. That is, how many values does it have? How many elements does it have? So count cars. Then we store it here. So it's going to return 3, of course. So the value in this variable is going to be 3. So we use a for loop to do that, to loop through the indexed array. So we say for our, of course, initialization, we declare variable x is equals to 0. Please note that this has to start from 0 and not 1. Because the first value in an array is at position 0. Then we say we want x to be less than the array length. Then we want to update x, so x plus plus. So in every loop, x is going to be updated by 1. By 1. Okay, so here we say echo cars x. So in the first loop, x is going to be 0, and therefore it's going to print out Volvo. In the second loop, because of the update, x is going to be 1. It's going to print out BMW. In the third loop, x is going to be 2, and therefore it's going to be, it's going to print out Toyota. In the next loop, x is going to be 3. And this condition is not going to pass. 3 is less than 3 because the array length is 3. 3 is less than 3, false. And therefore, this is not going to be executed anymore. And therefore, we're only going to print these values that are in the array. So that is how we loop through. That is how we loop through an indexed array. Please, as a reminder, always remember that this initialization has to begin from 0. And always remember that here you're always going to use a less than this value, because the position is always going, the last item is always going to be at x minus 1, the position where x is the total number of elements in the array. So that's why this is always going to be less than. And of course, you must use the updater there in order to update the value of x. Okay, so that is it about indexed arrays. So now we look at associative arrays. So an associative array is an array that uses named keys. So there are 2 ways of creating an associative array. First one, you create a variable, then you use the array. You use the array function. So this is the name of that position, Peter. This is the value of that position. This is the name of that position. This is the value of that position. Name, value. Alternatively, you can create it like this. Peter. Then you assign it. Ben. Then you assign it. Joe. Then you assign it. Okay. So this is an example of an associative array we've just created an associative array here. And if we want to print the age of Peter, we can do it like this: echo. So this is a string, Peter is, then the array, and the position of the array has the name Peter, years old. So this is gonna, this part here is gonna print 35 because it has stored 35. So this is no longer position 0, 1, and 2. No. It is Peter, Ben, and Joe. So that is the main difference between an associative array and an indexed array. Now, to loop through an associative array, now this is new, so please concentrate a little bit more. To loop through an associative array, we normally used a special looping function, which we might be meeting for the first time, which is called for each. So it's not for each. So you pronounce it as for each. For each. So let's have a look at the for each looping function. So in this example, we are declaring an array, an associative array, that is. Then the for each loop. So ignore this part first. Every other part is just like the for loop. So you see, we have an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket, then whichever code you want to execute repeatedly. Now, unlike the for loop, here we don't have an initialization, here we don't have an update, and we don't have a condition. So that's why specifically this looping function for each is used to loop through an associative array. So how to do that? Inside the for each parameter brackets here, we declare, we specify the array. So this age. Then we want this array to be saved as X. So it's just like we are copy pasting all the values of this array here in X. Then what we want to pick is the value. So we are using the arrow operator. It's called the arrow operator. So it's going to pick up the value in this array now, and it's gonna store it here in this variable X underscore value. Oh, not really. Okay, not really. Sorry about that. What I meant is this, when we do age as X, this particular X is going to be storing the key in every loop, and this variable here is going to be storing the value. So here we are echoing key X value is equals to that particular function, and therefore in the first loop it's going to print out that, in the second loop it's going to print out that, and in the third loop is going to print out that. So when you use for each, you don't need an update, you don't need a condition. The function itself is able to know the number of elements in the array, and therefore it cannot go beyond. It cannot go beyond. So again, we are going to be using the for each looping function so much going forward when we want to retrieve several rows from our database. So please remember this particular function. Now I am giving you a reading assignment. to go to the website W3 Schools and read more on multi-dimensional arrays. If you can also search on YouTube. I'm sure you'll find a good tutorial and learn more about multi-dimensional arrays, which are also very important in PHP. Okay, so as we wind up this topic, we want to look at how you can be able to sort the values that you've stored in your array. You can do so in a number of ways. You can be able to sort values either alphabetically or numerically in descending or ascending order. So luckily, we have functions, built-in PHP functions that are used to achieve this. So these are the functions. The first one here is called sort. It's used to sort an array in ascending order. Then we have rsort. You can think of it as reverse sort. So used to sort the array in descending order. Then we have asort. Is used to associate sort associative arrays in ascending order. So this one is for associative. And we have this one here. Is the opposite of that, in descending order. Then we also have ksort. Again for associative arrays in ascending order, but according to the key. Hey, by the way, this is important. According to the key. Remember here, we were sorting with asort and ksort. We were sorting arsort. We were sorting depending on the value. Then we also have kr sort. It's used to sort an associative array in descending order according to the key. So kr is the opposite of ksort. Okay, so I hope you'll remember those. So this is just an example. I won't dwell so much in this. So we just have an array here. If we use the sort, if we use the sort function, then it's gonna sort this array in ascending order. So the one with B, then T, then V. You can also be able to sort numbers. So if an array is storing the values of an array, their numbers, and you want to arrange them in ascending order, you can also use sort. It's going to give that particular order there. Then we have rsort, which is the reverse. Oh, sorry. This screenshot is wrong. It's supposed to be R here. So please remember that this is rsort. So that is rsort. So rsort, B is gonna be last, V is gonna be first. Again, this is rsort. Another mistake, this is rsort. And it's gonna give us from the largest to the smallest. Then here we have asort. So anywhere where you see A, you remember it's for associative array. So we have this associative array here. So this will sort in ascending order. So depending on the value, depending on the key, not value, depending on the key. So Ben first, then Joe, then Peter. Then you have ksort, which is the opposite. The opposite of that. So here we sort depending on I'm getting a little bit confused. Is this output correct? Let's just go back and look at k-sort in theory. K-sort ascending order according to the key. Ascending. So is this example correct? K-sort according to the key. Okay. Yeah. But if it's according to the key, ascending is going up. I think this screenshot might be this result might be wrong, eh? I think it's actually wrong. So please find out, read more and check the example on W3 School. I think it's actually wrong. AR sort. AR sort. It's wrong. You can see they're the same. They're the same with this one. So it's wrong. It's wrong. So AR sort is the reverse, eh? So it's gonna sort from the biggest according to value, not key. Even A sort. I think I messed up. I messed up. Even this is not correct. Let me just check again. Just a moment. A sort. Sort associative arrays in ascending order according to the value. It's supposed to be according to the value. A sort ascending. So even this one is wrong. Even this screenshot is wrong. Sorry about that. Because it's supposed to sort according to the value in ascending. So 35 is supposed to be the first one, then 37, then 34, and then 43. So that example is also wrong. Excuse me. Okay. So I think I'm just gonna check that and change it. But that is really it about this topic. Please read more about that. It has been a little confusing because of those mistakes there. But if you go through them again, you'll realize that they are not as difficult. So please go through them. That is it about this particular lesson. Thank you very much. We are going to be using more of what we've learned here in our practical. Asanteni sana.